I was talking to a mountain rescue guy I bumped into in the mountains, and I was asking about the wildlife he saw there, and he said that since February 2022, when the Russians invaded, there's been no hunting allowed in Ukraine, and because there's no battles in this part of Ukraine, that the wildlife has just exploded. Large populations of wolves, brown bears, lynx, and the wildlife is coming back. But conversely, in the other parts of Ukraine where the war is being actively fought, there's organizations calling it an ecocide. Vast amounts of Ukraine are being polluted, burnt, and any natural area is being turned into a battlefield.
That is Laval St. Germain, fresh off an expedition climbing the 6 highest peaks in the Carpathian Mountains in East Ukraine. As well as being a friend of this podcast, Laval is a record-setting explorer, a commercial airline pilot in the Canadian Arctic, and a fellow of the RCGS. He's the only Canadian to have summited Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen. He has climbed 7 of the highest summits on all 7 continents. He set a record for the fastest solo rowboat crossing from mainland Canada to mainland Europe, and he skied to the South Pole. He is someone who relishes the journey as much as reaching the final destination, which is why I'm really thrilled to have Laval St. Germain back with us here on Explore, the Canadian Geographic podcast. Welcome to all you explorers out there, armchair and in motion. I'm your host, David McGuffin. Before we get to Laval and Ukraine, there is a fantastic event I want to let you know about coming up on June 2nd at 50 Sussex Drive, the Canadian Geographic headquarters here in Ottawa. Oceania Canada, the conservation advocacy group, will be holding a talk with their lead marine scientist, Isabelle Jubainville, about their recent expedition, exploring some very cool and unique deep coral on Newfoundland's South Slope off of the Grand Banks. It's also about their efforts to have that region declared a marine protected area. Check out the Canadian Geographic website, cangeo.ca, for information on that. It should be up there soon, if not already. And there is also an article up there on the website about that expedition by award-winning science writer Alana Mitchell. Her stuff is always amazing. Okay, on to Laval and his travels into the mountains of eastern Ukraine. Oh, and one note. At one point, Laval refers to many Ukrainians post-holing through snow as they hike in the mountains. That just means stomping through the snow without skis or snowshoes, sinking knee-deep or so. It's a hardy workout. Laval, welcome back to the Explore podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me back, David. Appreciate it.
Always great to have you on. You're always off to interesting places. Last time we talked, and I encourage everyone to check this out, you were in Afghanistan. You're in another war zone now, just back from Ukraine, where you climbed, I think, the 6 highest peaks. Is that right, in Ukraine?
Yes, I went at the end of February and was planning on skiing this high altitude ridge for the Carpathian Mountains. So that was called Chornohora Ridge. I climbed all the 6 highest mountains over 2,000 meters. I guess all the 6 peaks that are 2,000 meters or higher in Ukraine.
So just to place this for people, the Carpathians are it runs all through Central Europe, basically, right? And the section you are in is Western Ukraine, Southwestern Ukraine, south of Lviv, if people can picture that.
Yeah. And to give people some idea, sadly, we don't hear about Ukraine enough in the news right now because of what's going on in the Middle East. But Ukraine, if you wanted to visualize this, it also demonstrates how big Canada is, that Ukraine is about roughly 600,000 square kilometers. The province of Manitoba is about 640,000 square kilometers. So let's just call it roughly the size of Manitoba. We've got a population of about 44 million people. So if you take all of Canada and put it in an area the size of Manitoba, you've got Ukraine. And if you took a map of the world and looked at one of the countries that's shaped like Ukraine is actually Australia, has a similar shape. And where I was skiing in the Carpathian Mountains would be the very southern part of Ukraine where it borders Romania. And what's interesting about this, as just about for all border regions in Europe, is that where I skied along that ridge originally used to be Poland on the north side of the ridge and Czechoslovakia on the south side of the ridge, which of course occurred after the Treaty, ironically, of St. Germain in 1919. In that part of the world, there was the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the creation of these independent countries, Poland and Czechoslovakia. And what was interesting, David, is where I was skiing along this roughly 2,000 meter high ridge, where old concrete border markers from 85 years ago that
Wow.
had a P on one side and a CS on the other side for Czechoslovakia. So really interesting, including remnants of World War I trenches that were up there. And the Carpathians are unique in a way because they're the wildest remaining area of Europe. They've got the largest, for example, wolf and brown bear population. Ancient cultures there. Where I was adventuring in Ukraine were the Hutsul people. They have their own language. They've been there for well over 1,000 years. So it's just a culturally, geographically, and politically, historically interesting area.
I've been to Ukraine, but never that part. But there is an element, especially southern Ukraine. I was in Crimea, for instance. It just feels ancient, right?
Yeah, when you think about how ancient it really was, the border where I was in the Carpathians has changed 17 times in history. 17 times it's belonged to different countries. And even more interesting is that there's a famous battle that occurred in 1915 between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Russians at a mountain called Mount Makivka. And that would be equivalent, that battle would be equivalent to where Canada forged our identity in Vimy Ridge in World War I, which was 2 years after that in 1917. So the Battle of Makivka is where Ukrainian riflemen fighting for the Austro-Hungarian Empire staved off a Russian attack that would have come over the mountains and swarmed into what they call the Hungarian lowlands or the Hungarian plains. And even the most patriotic song in Ukraine, which of course has come back to life again in 2022, was written about that battle. So I was in this just an amazing area where Ukraine fought for they didn't get independence. There was actually an independence movement that occurred that lasted 27 hours, but they were fighting for their land then. And now 85 years later, or whatever, actually it's over 100 years later, they're fighting for it again on their eastern flank. So very interesting part of the world.
Incredible. And so just comparing to say what I think a lot of people don't have a mental vision of what these mountains are like, but like compared to the Alps, for instance, what is that comparison?
Yeah, so they're very low. 2,000 meters would tell you that they're low. They are largely forested hills, forested mountains. They don't look Alp or Canadian Rockies at all, except for the ridge that I was on. It's all above tree line. It's got some fairly rugged cliff faces and that type of thing. It definitely has an alpine feel to it, but the rest of the Carpathians are fairly gentle, and if you compare them to the European Alps or the Canadian Rockies in that sense, but very wild forested valleys.
Beautiful.
And interesting, I was talking to a mountain rescue guy that I bumped into in the mountains, and I was asking about the wildlife he saw there, and he said that since February 2022, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, there's been no hunting allowed in Ukraine, and that area, because there's no battles in this part of Ukraine, that the wildlife has just exploded. So they have large populations of wolves, brown bears, lynx. I found lynx tracks everywhere, and the wildlife is coming back. But conversely, in the other parts of Ukraine where the war is being actively fought, especially the eastern part of Ukraine, it's being devastated. There's organizations, NGOs calling it an ecocide. Vast amounts of Ukraine are being polluted, burnt, and any natural area is being turned into a battlefield. So it's a real strange juxtaposition of the war preserving the wild in the areas that the war has not touched, and then absolutely decimating it especially in eastern Ukraine, where about 1/5 of the country now is occupied by the Russians.
Fascinating. So what was your route in? Did you go through Kiev or?
Yeah, so you can't get into Ukraine via aviation means, via airlines. So I flew into Krakow via Frankfurt from Calgary, Frankfurt, Krakow. Then from there, you're on a train. So I took a train to a far eastern part of Poland to a town called Przemyśl. And what's interesting about Przemyśl is it's spelled Przemysl.
Naturally,
Przemyśl. Luckily, I found a YouTube video that taught me how to pronounce it. So when I walked up to the ticket counter in Krakow, I sounded like a local. And I just one way to Przemyśl, and she handed me the ticket. I couldn't believe that was a pronunciation. So I got to Przemyśl, which is in far western Ukraine, far eastern Poland. That I connected to a train that took me to Lviv. And it's interesting, you get on this train and you cross the Ukrainian-Polish frontier, and then the train just stops. And Ukrainian military get on board and they start checking everybody's documentation. And one of the interesting conversations they had with this young Ukrainian soldier when he was checking me, I had my skis and my backpack and everything in, they're all sleeper cars in my sleeper car.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me what I was doing. And I said, I'm here to climb your country's highest mountain and ski across Chornohora Ridge. And he kind of raised his eyebrows. And then he said, do you have any marijuana with you? And I said, no. And he goes, I know it's legal in Canada. And I said, you're right, but I don't have any marijuana with me. He goes, are you sure? Because I know it's legal in Canada. It was really funny. And I said, no, I don't have any marijuana. He goes, any other, what did he call it? Any other drugs? And I said, yeah, I've got ibuprofen and Tylenol. And he said, okay, get those out. I want to see them. I'm like, oh, they're buried in my backpack somewhere. He disappeared back about half an hour later, forgot about the ibuprofen and Tylenol. And that was it. Off I went. He said, have a good trip and thank you for coming to Ukraine.
Wow.
And so now you're in this, you get out to Lviv in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And the particular way I did it, I sat there for about 4 hours in Lviv. And then I boarded a slow train, coal-fired Ukrainian sleeper train. Very interesting. Still coal-fired. And
like an old steam engine. Like,
yeah, it was run by coal.
wow.
And we took the trip down straight south to quite a remote village in the Carpathians called Kavasi. Then I just got out of the train and started walking around with my broken Ukrainian and tried to find a place to sleep. And then that was the start of my adventures in the Ukrainian Carpathians.
So what's that town? And is that sort of the trailhead traditionally for this?
No.
No.
No, it's called the Kavasi, Kvasy, if you write it in English. And it's just a remote little traditionally Hutsul village in the middle of the Carpathians. And the Carpathians are so spectacular. They would be not unlike some of the terrain around Ottawa or in Quebec in the Laurentians.
Yeah.
They're wooded and everybody's using wood for their stoves. So you've got that layer of wood burning smoke and it's agricultural with herding sheep, cattle, and they even have their own breed of horses, a special Hutsul pony there. And it's just this tranquil, remote area in the Carpathians, and the people speak this weird blend in some regions of Romanian, Hungarian, and Ukrainian, and of course the Hutsul language itself. So really an interesting place. And I always feel that when you do these trips and you get into the real remote areas of a country, you get to see the real country. And what I did notice, sadly, about Kavasi, even though it was a small village, the cemetery was overflowing with young dead, the graves of young dead Ukrainian soldiers. And you're looking at their birth dates, and it's 2001, and 1995, and 1998, and they're all fresh, and they all have their pictures on them and Ukrainian flags. And every village you go to has fresh graves, so to speak, which is really drives home the fact that this country of 44 million people has lost. It's tough to say because the Ukrainians don't want to really give up the information, and I don't blame them. Between 70 and 140,000 military victims and about 16,000 civilians. So really, those are the times that, even though you're in this tranquil, peaceful, remote village, you know that there's a war raging about 1,500 kilometers away.
As you're entering the country, I mean, how much does the war come up in conversation? Does that just dominate everything?
In the village, it doesn't come up at all because very few people spoke a single word of English. But in Kyiv, I was able to talk to, actually, interestingly, he's a YouTube blogger that just came up to me and started talking to me. And he's done over 1,000 trips into Chernobyl, bringing tourists in there. Of course, that has ended now because Chernobyl's closed.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, yesterday was the 40th anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster.
Crazy, yeah.
1986. And we had a really good conversation. He is from Donetsk Oblast, or a region of Ukraine along the Russian border. He's a native Russian speaker because that part of Ukraine is Russian speaking, but he's a hardcore Ukrainian nationalist. And it was just interesting to hear the hardships that they're going through. The economy, the environment, all the mines in that part of Ukraine have been abandoned. And we only get, when you speak to people on the ground there, we only get reports about Zelensky meeting with the NATO or meetings between the U.S. and Zelensky and Ukrainian peace talks or non-peace talks and drone attacks on refineries inside of Russia and that type of thing. But when you talk to the people on the ground there, you find out that industrial sites, let's say a refinery that we'd have here in Canada, is completely abandoned or damaged from the war. And so you've got this, to me, this potential environmental disaster about to occur in Ukraine, where you've got unattended industrial sites that are largely damaged, that are leaking, burning. You've got two damaged nuclear facilities, Zaporizhzhia and Chernobyl. The Russians were crazy enough to hit Chernobyl with a drone attack.
Yeah.
And so it's just, we talk about the war, we talk about the peace efforts, but we've got a possible calamity. They've breached dams there that have flooded out hundreds of thousands of hectares of land. And it's just, we're not getting, we get the highlights and now we get nothing about what's going on in Ukraine. So very interesting to hear people on the ground.
Yeah. How do you put this? Is there any feeling of sense of hope at all, or is it really there's kind of despondency, or how would you describe it?
Every Ukrainian I've talked to, even Ukrainians here, refugees that have come to Canada, we've accepted about 300,000 refugees of the 5.8 million people that have left Ukraine.
Yeah.
Even when I bring up the fact that right now it seems that Ukraine has fought Russia to a stalemate, and possibly gaining some ground now. They are gaining ground. I have not spoken to one that seems to be optimistic about the outcome of the war. Right. For example, at my barber shop where I get my hair cut, the girl that cuts my hair is Ukrainian. And even though I ask and say about the advances that Ukraine's making, she doesn't want to go back, her and her fiance, because she said we're surrounded by bad neighbors.
Yeah.
And she thinks that it'll just come up again. And yeah, so it's a tragedy for sure. And obviously, especially for people that have been displaced, either internally displaced or had to leave the country.
I'll get us into the mountains in a second, but I'm just curious too, as a Canadian being there, obviously there's a long history. There's a ton of Ukrainians, especially out in your part of the world, in your part of Canada. Did that connection come up at all as you were out there?
They knew that we had a large population of Ukrainians in Canada. They knew about Western Canada having a large population. We have the third largest diaspora in the world. So I think we've got about 1.2 million Canadians of Ukrainian origin. Plus, we've added 300,000. So we have a strong Ukrainian presence. And yeah, they knew about it. And they're always interested to hear about the fact that we have the Onion Dome churches out in the prairies. And when you mention Ukrainian food, they're impressed that we knew about, or that I knew about Ukrainian food. So yeah, they're aware of that for sure.
Okay, so let's get us back into your village. And so you found a place to stay, I think is where we left it off. And so take us from there.
Yeah, so I found a place to stay. I had plotted out where I wanted to start the trip. And I started at an abandoned Soviet-era hotel complex that was completely overgrown and crumbling. And it was on the side of this wooded mountain slope on the edge of this oak and beech forest.
Yeah.
So I had a guy drive me up there, a local guy. It was only about a 10-kilometer trip to get me to where I wanted to start my hike. And then I just started walking, carrying my skis in my backpack. Within about an hour, I was required to start skiing the mountain. And I'm in these ancient beech forests, and I'm following wild boar tracks and deer tracks. Go higher into the mountains, and you're passing these remote little farmsteads and shepherd's huts, and you just slowly climb through these ancient forests until you get up onto this windswept, high altitude for them, alpine environment. And then from there, you're in the alpine the entire time, deep snow, wind blasted, an area for sure that you would not want to be caught in a storm. There's no shelter or anything. And the first mountain of the 6 was a mountain called Petros. So I climbed that, and then I found an actually emergency shelter, just a little A-frame open on one end. And instead of setting up my tent, I spent a chilly night in there, and I had bluebird weather. It was incredible. And one unique thing I noticed about Ukraine, first of all, is that I didn't expect that there'd be people in the backcountry. I thought because of the war, first of all, that you'd see no fighting age men.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't see people enjoying themselves in the backcountry. That I saw quite a few people back there hiking, just like you would here in Canada. And what's unique about Ukrainians is they don't seem to ski or use snowshoes. They just post hole through the snow, which was insane to me how tough these people are. They would post hole for kilometers and kilometers instead of wearing snowshoes or skis. I saw 3 people with skis and 2 people with snowshoes the entire time I was there. The rest just post hole, and that's the way they get around in the deep snow of the Carpathians, which was so strange, but they're tough.
That's amazing. No, I wouldn't expect to see you'd see any people up there. And so, and weather-wise, you said you had good weather. What temperature-wise, what's that like?
I had about -8 as a low. I had +2 to
Yeah.
-3 during the day. I had light winds and blue skies. I absolutely nailed it. I was just before I left Cavassi, I checked the forecast and I couldn't believe. I thought if this holds out, it's going to be amazing. When I got to, speaking about the people in the backcountry, when I got to the summit of the highest mountain in Ukraine on day 2, it's called Hoverla. There was probably 30 people up there, young men, girls. There's even a couple of dogs because the way that they came up, it's just a trail up through a very moderate trail up through the forest and then up into the Alpine. People were flying little tourist drones around, which I thought was unusual. I thought for sure drones would not be allowed
Yeah.
anywhere in Ukraine because of, for some reason, I assumed that. People taking photos. It was just like being on any mountain summit anywhere, an easy to achieve mountain summit. So it was interesting. And then when people would talk to me, I'd say, sorry, English, and told them that I was from Canada. Everybody was so blown away that I came that far to see their country, and because there are no tourists there right now. So they were all impressed that a Canadian wanted to come and ski in their mountains, which was nice. And to me, David, that's where some of my favorite moments from all my, for what some people consider crazy travels come from, is the fact that wherever I go in the world, I meet people where I've been
Yeah.
on their highest mountain, or I've traveled to their country. And I get out of an Uber or a taxi and I see that the driver's Somali, and I say Mahat Sanid, which is thank you in
Yeah.
Somali. You ask me, how do I know that? And I said, oh, I climbed your highest mountain. It's called Chimboris. Or I made a post recently about cycling to the Strait of Hormuz and swimming in it when I rode across Oman on my bike. And you make these connections, and people love that when you can talk about where they're from, and to identify places, to know that I've stood on the edge of the Strait of Hormuz and watched the ships go back and forth and swam in there. Now it's in the news every day. And
Yeah.
I don't know, there's something to me that's really very valuable about that.
Yeah. So I think back pre-journalism for me, my brother and I drove around South Africa in 1994 during the election. It was state of emergency. It was like brink of a civil war, basically. And we felt like the only tourists there. And the upside of that was everyone wanted to talk to us. There is that element of it. People are very curious, and you just get to have these conversations that you might not otherwise have in a more touristed country. You probably definitely wouldn't have in a more touristed country, you know?
Yeah, I think people are always proud to show off their country, right?
Yeah.
If you're hiking around Gatineau Park right out your back door and you run into somebody from the Czech Republic who came to see it, you'd be like, oh, wow. And you give them places to go, and are you enjoying yourself? There's something, we all have pride in where we're from. And when you're in a war zone or a place that nobody wants to go, they're really impressed when you've made the effort to go there. And especially when you're traveling exposed and naked in a sense. You're either on a bike or on skis or on foot. You're not hiding behind glass and steel of a vehicle train. And they really enjoy that.
Yeah, no, for sure. So what was the most challenging part of this? It sounds like this was, as Laval trips go, maybe not your most difficult, but what were the biggest challenges?
No, it wasn't the most difficult, but it was more of a cultural experience. I
Yeah.
wanted to go there. The most challenging thing, and I tell this to everybody, is sometimes just leaving, right? That I use that term, the Norwegian term doorstokkmila. The first mile to the door, the first mile after the door is always the toughest. But once you get moving and you build up that momentum, everything falls into place. You're exposed as a traveler, an adventure traveler in these places. People can sense, I think, that you're not from there, and they tend to help. From the old babushka on the coal-fired train that could obviously tell that I didn't know what the heck I was doing. Back to trade travel, I didn't know I had to grab my mattress, and I didn't know I had to grab my sheets and my pillowcase and what to do with it after. And she was impatient but kind with me, and that's what I love about it. I love that. I love going into the unknown like that. So the toughest is always leaving. But then, because you read, people don't, YouTube posts or thumbnails about travel in Ukraine, and they always focus on the danger.
Yeah.
I went to Kyiv, David, and it was amazing. One of the world's great cities. And
tell me why.
It's the location is spectacular. It occupies these high points along the Dnipro River, which I swam in while I was there.
For the polar plunge, thank you, Laval.
And it's littered is not the right word, but littered with spectacular buildings and littered with churches. Just amazing. The golden domed churches everywhere. Cafes, bars, art displays, statues, just a world-class city. And when you're there, if I were to transport you there, other than sandbags around some of the government buildings and the real heritage sculptures and displays being protected by blast walls,
Yeah.
the only thing you notice, just about every building, every cafe has a small generator outside of it, because about 70% of the energy infrastructure in Ukraine has been destroyed by the Russians. So in order to power these places, they have gas-operated generators everywhere. So the constant hum of generators is everywhere. But other than that, it's a completely normal city. You have a air raid app on your phone, and if this air raid app goes off, which it didn't in the 2 days that I was in Kyiv, then you go to a bomb shelter or into a subway. So other than that, you can't tell, which I find amazing, that you're in a country that's being ripped to pieces by war, and yet you're in the capital city and you are sitting out on a terrace having a cappuccino and a tuna sandwich. But that's how humans are. We adapt to anything and becomes normal. I went for an incredible run around Kyiv to see it. I find running is the best way to see a city. And I went through Maidan Square, the most famous square in all of Ukraine. And I was blown away by the memorial they have to the fallen people of Ukraine in there. There's thousands and thousands of photos and flags of deceased Ukrainians, which was really sobering. And I continued my run, and I ran through this iconic, I should know the name of the statue, but it's an obelisk with a gold figure on the top.
Yeah.
And I ran right underneath it, filmed it, and kept my run going along the Dnipro. And then I got home, and about 4 days later, after I got home, the steps that I ran up to go through this, they're maybe 5 meters across by 5 meters high to get into this, to run underneath this obelisk, were hit by a Russian drone right where I was running. It just shows you how random it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, Kyiv is an amazing place, and you'll never see me telling everybody how dangerous travel to Ukraine is. For me personally, you have to think about the risk. You have to think about the chances of a drone falling out of the sky and hitting you. The closer, of course, you get to the front lines, the worse it is. Kyiv, when I was there, was quiet. Just before I got there, it had one of its biggest attacks ever. And then while I was there, it was quiet. And then Lviv got hit shortly after that as well. So it's
just ongoing. Yeah.
It's just ongoing, and it's chronic, and there's no end in sight. But Ukraine is fighting. They really are fighting like lions for the size of the country compared to who they're fighting against. And they're talking about Russian losses of over 300 a day.
Yeah.
The Ukrainians are launching about 9,000 drone attacks per day.
Yeah.
It's gotten to the point where the Ukraine war is being fought by young, tech-savvy men and women, Ukrainians who are fighting for their country. And they have even developed a gamification of war. And love it or hate it, it's helping them survive the war. They've got this system, it's called Brave One, and this Brave One market. So most of the deaths now in Ukraine are caused by FPV drones with a camera on them, so that you can actually prove that you've hit a tank, an artillery launcher, or a Russian soldier. You get points. So let's say 40 points for a tank, 6 points for a killed Russian, 8 points for a injured Russian. And you take these points, and they're on a leaderboard that all other units can see, and your unit gets points. And then with these points, you can go to this Brave One marketplace and buy weapons. You can buy drone parts, you can buy artillery, you can buy all kinds of different technology, and then you give real-time reviews of the equipment and how it's working into this Brave One system.
Yeah.
And so it's an incredible way to update quickly how the new weapon systems are working. And it gamifies the art of war. And it makes these units want to, frankly, kill more and cause more damage because they get more points, and they're able to redeem them in almost like an Amazon marketplace. It's very unique, and it's disturbing, but you have to remember that they're fighting for their homeland.
Right. And as you're saying, those graveyards, they can't afford the losses in human life that they're having. So this shift needed to happen in some ways, right? If they're to have any chance at all.
Yeah, and Ukraine is really, they've developed this battlefield software program called Delta, and it's this overarching visualization of the battlefield, and anybody can log into it that are part of the military there, from a general in Kyiv to a guy at the front line on his phone, and they can see real-time imaging. They can see real-time data of all the Russian movements. They now have AI drones that can't be jammed because they launched them, and there's no connection between them and the pilot. And they are revolutionizing war to the point where NATO and the US are coming to them, as with the Iranian war.
Yeah.
Using their know-how to battle the Iranians. So it's just this accelerator, this tech drone death accelerator that's occurring, which is it's horrific.
No, it's changed the face of warfare completely, to the point where, the conversation in Canada even a year ago is about what fighter jets we're going to get, and that's now totally backseat. And Canada has actually jumped full force into this whole drone world, and Ukraine's are the big entry point for us too.
They're manufacturing over 200,000 drones a month now in the Ukraine, 200,000 themselves. These are indigenous Ukrainian drone manufacturers. They're not buying them from China and bringing them in. They're actually building them.
Yeah.
And they're trying to ramp that up, 200,000 a month. And they're now responsible for about 80% of the Russian casualties are drones. It's becoming so prevalent there that there is now a PTSD, or a psychiatric condition they call drone phobia, where because of the fact you're constantly exposed to death by drones, just the sound of a drone are causing people to suffer traumatic morale wrecking injuries, so to speak. And they think about 50% of the Ukrainian population now is suffering from PTSD. So we talk about the ecocide, we talk about the damage to the environment, we talk about the death and destruction, but now we're going to have a population that is impacted for generations by this war. There's a quite a well-known story about Ukrainian refugee children who went to a retreat in Italy, and an airplane flew over, and the Ukrainian children all scattered and went under their beds and desks, in their walls. And there's these byproducts of war that you don't hear about in the news, and you're seeing it now in Ukraine after 4 years of constant shelling. And now the worst part about drone warfare is the fact that it's not a random shell coming out of the sky. It's something that's looking for you, seeing, and then chasing you down.
Yeah, it's terrifying. Yeah.
Like something out of a horror movie.
Yeah, no, we're getting into Terminator sort of zone, aren't we? Like Schwarzenegger. Was there an encounter or a conversation that you had there that sort of summed up the resilience of the Ukrainian people in all of this?
Just their general attitude and the way they kind of shrug it off when you talk about it. When you try and empathize in the way that I'm really sorry what your country's going through, and they just sort of shrug their shoulders, and basically in a sense they're saying it is what it is, and there's nothing we can do about it. We just have to fight. There's a real serious hatred for Putin there when you bring up the war. Yeah. And they say the one guy I talked to with the blog, he said quite literally everything out of his mouth is a lie. And he goes, I'm not saying it because I'm Ukrainian. He goes, I'm a native Russian speaker. I've lived here my whole life. This guy would have been in his sort of mid-60s type of range. Mm-hmm. He grew up in a coal mining area. And he said, everything's a lie. And basically, we're fighting for our lives, is what he said.
It's the front line in the battle for democracy right now, really, isn't it? Do you get that sense that there's an awareness of that too? And maybe why aren't we helping them more?
In conversations, I get the sense that, watch out. It's happened to us, but it could happen to you. And to be frank, 6 months ago when we had the U.S. saying some pretty incendiary things about Canada, about Greenland and Canada, 51st state stuff, suddenly you're saying, is this the way they felt in December of 2021 when there was rumors that the Russians were going to attack? I didn't believe they were going to attack. And then when the Russians started massing at the Belarusian border in early February and late January of 2022, I don't think the Ukrainians, even Zelensky, didn't think they were going to attack. And so when you hear authoritarian type leaders saying this stuff, you go, are we now... Yeah. I don't want it to be too hyperbolic, but are we now feeling what the Ukrainians may have felt pre-February 2022? And it certainly made me identify with the feelings that they had.
Let's finish up in the mountains. How about we do that? So how long was the trip total, that part of it?
55 kilometers of skiing.
Yeah.
Over 6 mountains.
Yeah. Camping
and tenting in incredible areas above tree line. Mm-hmm. Going to this famous abandoned structure on the top of one of the mountains called Pipivan, and they call it the White Elephant. Mm-hmm. And then the Poles built it in the 1930s as an observatory.
Oh, cool.
And just when they got it built, the border changed and it became the Soviet Union. They never got to use it. It's been abandoned. It's covered in rime ice. It's this massive building on the top of a mountain. You can see it for 50 kilometers away as you're skiing towards it.
Yeah.
And it's just this Eastern European abandoned, haunted looking building on the top of a mountain. And the Ukrainian Mountain Rescue Organization has invaded part of it, and they use it as a place for 3 mountain rangers to live in on the top of the mountain and go out and rescue people if required in that area. So it shows you that there are functioning parts of Ukraine still. You have a mountain rescue organization.
Yeah.
Paramedics up on top of this mountain in the remote Carpathian Mountains. So the country has not ground to a standstill, which I was surprised. I thought for sure you'd be wartime footing everywhere, but there's still stuff happening. There's still local elections happening, municipal elections, not federal or national, but there's still governments being done and things are happening, construction, like a new hotel being built or houses being built, and life goes on. The entire country doesn't stop. But yeah, so I came off Pippi Van on the way down, met one of the mountain rangers I referenced earlier, and we met on the top of this mountain, Smodrich Mountain it's called, and he offered me Fanta. He had a bottle of Fanta. So he had a cigarette, and we each had a glass of Fanta on the top of this mountain. Through Google Translate, we had this conversation.
No way.
And now I converse with him on WhatsApp, and I converse with him on Facebook. And it's just really interesting we have to translate our conversations, but it's interesting to have that connection there. And yeah, we spent probably 40 minutes on the top of this mountain. The weather was not too bad. And we just had a conversation like you would anywhere. And then I continued down to this remote village called Zimbronia, and I just walked into this village with this log onion dome church and dogs barking and chickens walking around. And I saw a sign written in Ukrainian that said shop, as in a place to shop.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked in, and there was this tiny little garage, and you could buy pop and chocolate and chips and beer. And I walked up to the lady and I asked if I could get a ride to Kavasi, and in half an hour, a guy rolled up and this beat up car, and off we went. I went through some military checkpoints in the middle of nowhere.
Wow.
Because of the location near the Romanian border. There's a lot of military around. So you had to have your passport ready. You're on these remote mountain roads that are falling apart, just mud roads, and there'd be 5 or 6 Ukrainian soldiers. So you come around a corner and they're checking stuff, and because they're looking for infiltrations from Romania. And then strangely, when I got back a couple of weeks later, there was a Russian drone attack in that region, including hitting a ski hill that I drove right through called Bukovel, and a drone hit the ski hill. So I thought I was so far away from the front line there'd be no issues, but obviously the long-range drones from Russia are getting there. So it's an interesting place for sure because of that.
Huh. And it sounds beautiful. And I think if you got to get a bit of gumption and do some planning, it seems accessible too, right?
It's like anything.
Yeah.
You have to make up your mind to do it, and then you make your own assessments as you go. And I mean, it's the same thing. I've climbed and skied off the highest mountain in Iraq, the highest mountain in Iran.
Right.
I've tried to climb the highest mountain in Israel, but there was a military post on the top. You can't go up there. So I like going to these places, and I don't like going to them. It's not war tourism. It's going to places that are in the zeitgeist all the time, that we all think about, that we all talk about, that you read about daily. And I want to see them for myself. It's just something I want to do. I want to go there. I want to get the feel on the ground. I want to taste it. I want to smell it. And I want to see how the people are talking and feeling and living. And it gives you a real perspective about your world.
Yeah. And the beauty of doing it with climbing, for instance, is it's a slightly different prism too. Which is great. Listen, I actually want to touch on one more thing, because you mentioned swimming in the Strait of Hormuz, which is obviously the only news right now. So when was that? And was that
It was 2022. Took my gravel bike and I rode from the border of Yemen, like right from the border checkpoint, all the way through Oman to the very tip of the Arabian Peninsula.
Yeah.
So when you look at the Strait of Hormuz, if you can imagine it right now, if the body of water looks like a thigh with a knee, and then the bottom of the leg, right in the crook of the knee is where I went to the very, very tip.
Yeah, wow.
It's interesting. You've got the UAE occupies the northern border of Oman.
Yeah.
And then Oman terminates in the mountains along the Arabian Peninsula. And then you go through UAE, and then you go through this little sort of floating chunk of Oman, which is on the very tip of the peninsula again. So you have to go through the border crossing to get there. And they call it the Norway of the Middle East because of the fjords there. Really interesting country.
Oh, really? Like beautiful.
Yeah. And I went right to the very tip. I very carefully studied the map, and I wanted to go to the very tip. And I rode my bike to the edge of the cliff over the water. And then I rode around and found an area where I could access it and went for a swim in the Strait of Hormuz, which was, I knew it's an iconic body of water, but I didn't know it was going to be playing such a central role in our economy, politics, and frankly, world history right now.
Yeah, no kidding. Happily a little calmer there. So were you in Yemen then, actually in?
No, because I had a single entry visa to Oman. If I would have left, I couldn't come back in. Because I tried to, I said to the Yemeni border guard, I said, can I come in? He said, sure. And then he said in Arabic to the guy that I used to drive, he said, does he have a single entry visa? And the guy said, yeah. And he goes, don't let him come in because I can't let him out. So they were very nice about it. That part of Yemen is not Houthi controlled. It's not the area that's really hot right now.
What would have been southern Yemen, I guess, then. Yeah. When it
would have been
when it was split.
The western part of Yemen.
Yeah.
So this would be, it's interesting, that part of Oman near the Yemeni border, there's a city in Oman, I think it's about 130K from the border. It's called Salalah. And it's, even though it's in the desert, it has this little crescent-shaped area of greenery around it, this microclimate. And in July, it rains there with waterfalls and forests. It's the strangest thing. And then you climb out of it onto a plateau, and you're basically on the edge of the empty quarter, and you're in a big sand desert. It's very interesting.
Fascinating. And one of the reasons I love having you on here, and I had Michael Palin on a couple months ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was amazing. And part of the reason I love him is his travel, right? And I think you guys have a similar mindset. It's very much meeting people where they live, and it's getting to know the country at the grassroots and being humble in that space and listening and learning. And so I always love having you on. And thanks so much for joining us.
Well, here's to being humble, listening, and learning. I think we both live by that creed. So thanks for having me on, David. Always flattered to be on.
And thanks to all of you for listening. If you enjoyed this talk, check out Laval's last visit with us, episode 95, where he talks about his attempts to summit Afghanistan's highest peak. His descriptions of maneuvering through a nation run by the hardline Taliban regime to get to his mountain is just fascinating. And please keep your comments coming. We love to hear what you think, and also give us that juicy 5-star rating if you're enjoying the podcast. It helps us to build our Explore community. You can also email us at explore@canadiangeographic.ca. I promise I'll get back to you, and I might even read your note on the air. Until next time, when we'll explore again, I'm David McGuffin.
I think right now we're enjoying very much looking back at the Earth, and it's just a fantastic experience, and I just can't wait to get back and start telling people
We left Simpson about June 10th with the fur brigade, consisting of a number of yacht boats, each manned by 10 voyageurs.
For us Inuit, it means that Inuit oral history is very strong.
And we flew low over every inch of the country that could be. We were hoping that he would fire at us.
I guess 160 dives or so. There are shrimp, fish swimming around outside. It's just fabulous here.
Well, I'm a first for Canada.